What kind of world do I want to live in? I think about this question a lot.
For our generation and for specifically my group of people, which is refugees, the circumstances might dismantle any vision of the future that we have.
You're trying to rebuild, you're trying to make a future for yourself, and then the climate-related disaster comes and you start again. It's not about how it's affecting you now, it's about how it's affecting you your entire life.
First step to understand is that we're all a part of it. None of us are going to be left out by the crisis.
We're at a stage where if we don't act now, really there won't be very much left.
There are generations that will never see certain things that we grew up seeing in real life.
We have to start treating this like the emergency it is. To achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have to go from an intention to a serious commitment.
Business leaders really need to rethink how they conduct their business and invest in creating systems that are climate friendly.
The action I would like to see is accountability. Structures being put in place where countries aren't just asked to do something, but they're kept accountable to the decisions that they make.
There has to be that strong collaboration between government, between corporations, between youth activists to drive change forward.
The world I would want to live in is a world where imagining the future is not a privilege.
I want to live in a world where people do not give up on hope that a positive change is possible.
The fact that you're listening today means that you are willing to make a change.
Thank you, Mark, for being so vigilant and shows the agility.
It's a heavy subject.
Agility of the panel. Welcome, everyone. Good to start on a little bit more of a humorous note because it's a very serious panel. At least a very serious topic with the most important players in the climate field in the world. And let's face it, we are in an emergency situation when it comes to climate and nature. We had the warmest year on record last year. Our planet is on fire and we need to act now. The cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action. And we just have to understand there is no vaccine against climate change. There's no easy solutions, but the solutions are there. And we can do half of it before 2030 with the technology we do have today, and if we now start to implement what we agreed at COP26. So we have a great panel to discuss this. And as I said, we also have two of the key players from COP26 with us, Secretary Kerry being the climate envoy of the US, and Minister Xie, one of the most experienced Chinese leaders in this, also the climate envoy and former environment minister of China. And the two of them, at the last moment at COP26, showed that there is possibilities for the G2 to still agree on important topics. So I think we should give them a big applause for that. And we are, of course, very interested in hearing what new breakthroughs we can have in the years to come and in the run-up to the COP27 that will be in Africa, in Egypt. Let me start with you, Secretary Kerry. Thank you for your leadership from the Senate and until today on oceans, on biodiversity, nature. We know that a million species are at threat of being distinct. We know that there is so much at stake now, but still we can reach 1.5 degrees if we now start to implement what we have agreed. But last year we saw an increase in the global CO2 emissions. So where do we stand, and what measures can we take, and what measures will the US, under your leadership and President Biden's leadership, take to make the planet a better place for future generations?
Well, Borja, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and I'm delighted to be here with all the members of the panel, particularly with this gentleman. We have spent many hours together over 25 years, and we are friends, despite real differences between our countries, obviously. But we have heeded the admonition of our presidents that we need to try to find a way forward. Climate is not a bilateral issue between the United States and China. Climate is a multilateral, universal, existential issue for everybody. And unless China and the United States together try to find a way forward, and other countries are involved, obviously, but unless we do that, we can't get where we need to go. You say, where do we stand now? We stand on a precipice. And if you pull back from the precipice and do the things we need to do, we have an incredible future ahead of us with the capacity to open up a brand new, unbelievable economy globally in the world's greatest transformation ever as we move to a new energy economy, as we get pollution out of the air, which is what is causing the climate crisis. People forget, greenhouse gases are pollution. And 15 million people a year die because of the quality of the air around the world, which comes principally from fossil fuel burning that is not mitigated, abated. And so we stand on the precipice of being able to move away from that. I think also on the other side of the precipice, you better be realistic. 51 degrees centigrade yesterday in Pakistan, in South Asia. 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic, and 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic a few weeks ago. You can run around the planet, and there isn't any country on the planet that isn't feeling and living the impacts of the climate crisis. Droughts, fires, mudslides, floods, storms with greater intensity that comes from the increased moisture coming from the ocean, which comes from the increased heat going into the ocean, because 90% of the warming of the planet goes into the ocean. And the oceans, they are at risk. The chemistry changing faster than they have in millions of years. And you can't solve the problem of the oceans if you don't solve climate. You can't solve the problem of climate if you don't solve the ocean. And people need to understand that 51% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. So we're dealing with a crisis here, folks. It's a crisis made by human beings. As President Kennedy reminded us, most of the problems on the planet are caused by human beings, but that means they can be solved by human beings. And this can be solved. In Glasgow, we left Glasgow, thanks to Minister Scheer and Frans Timmermans and countless other ministers and countries. We came together knowing what the stakes were, recognizing that we needed to come together and compromise, find a way forward. But for the first time ever, the whole community of nations that came together said, we must reduce the consumption of fossil fuel. We must phase down the use of coal. That's never happened before. We embraced a 1.5 degrees target. And the 1.5 degrees was not something anybody pulled out of the sky or did as a matter of politics or ideology. The 1.5 degrees is based on science. In fact, everything that we think we're talking about doing is based on math, mathematics, and physics. And it is rare that you can get the kind of certainty about what is happening to us, as opposed to all the investments that countries make. Any individual makes an investment. You can't be as certain about that investment, usually, as you can be certain about what is happening to the planet and why. So we need to move. We need to accelerate. We need to do more. And Xie Zhenhua understands that. He's committed to that, as we are. And we're working together now to try to find the way that we can move forward. 20 countries, ladies and gentlemen, equal 80% of all the emissions on the planet. Think of it that way. And if those 20 countries can move rapidly enough, we can win this battle. We left Glasgow with 65% of global GDP committing to real plans that can get you to 1.5 degrees. That means 35% did not join that. And what we need to do now is help some countries that need assistance to be able to make the transformation do it. So we're working. The United States is working together with Germany and Britain and France, other countries, UAE, with India, with South Africa, with Indonesia, with Vietnam, with Mexico, with other countries, to help them to get the investable financing and the technology that will help them make this transition. I am absolutely convinced we will get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy on this planet. I cannot tell you I'm convinced that we will get there in time, that we will do what the scientists told us we must do 4 years ago, which was reduced by 45% minimum over the next 12 years. We lost 4 of those years, and you all know why. Now we didn't lose them completely because other nations kept going and people kept doing things, even in America. But we didn't have momentum. Now we have momentum, and we have the ability to be able to actually keep the world at the degrees we're aiming for. Fatih Birol and the IEA let the world know that if we implemented everything that we agreed to do in Glasgow, we would be at 1.8 degrees centigrade of warming by 2050. That doesn't tell me we can be satisfied with 1.8 degrees. It tells me that with a little more effort, we get to 1.5. And every tenth of a degree makes the world of difference. Bottom line, I'll just close by saying to you, no government has the money to be able to solve this problem by itself. No government will move fast enough to solve this government by itself. We need you. We need the private sector all around the world to step up, as major financial institutions are stepping up, as companies that have joined the First Movers Coalition, who are saying, even by paying a green premium, they're going to buy 10% green steel. They're going to buy green cement. They're going to have, some of them have invested in electric airplanes. Some of them are going to make new ships, Maersk, for instance, that are carbon-free. We're starting. We're on the move. We simply have to accelerate this by several times. But I am convinced that through technology, through innovation, through human ingenuity, if we will find the human will to make the choices available to us, we can win this battle. That's where we stand.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry, for that. I think you deserve a great applause. And Minister Chair, welcome to you. And thank you also for your leadership at COP26 and on the environment and climate for decades. You heard what Secretary Kerry said about that we have to accelerate this several times just now. And we know that China has committed to peak emissions before 2030 and also being climate neutral by 2060. Could you share with us what next steps and what will take place from China's side in the coming years based on these ambitions? Can it be accelerated? And do you also feel that the collaboration from Glasgow between Secretary Kerry and yourself could be continued in the run-up to COP27? Minister, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. Kerry, for your remarks. And actually, among the audience, and I have a lot of friends there, so hello to all of you. When we deal with climate change, the Chinese government actually has been persistent in our perspective. In January this year, which is the video meeting, President Xi said that we should work together to overcome the crisis and to achieve the win-win situation, and we should also work together to solve the crisis, and we need to make contribution to our future. And last September, and President Xi also put forward a new initiative was main message is that we should push forward a more robust green transition and green development. So global and green development is one of the key themes. Facing with the common future of humanity, every party should make their contribution so that we can deal with the crisis and the situation. So only by cooperation can we find the solution. So actually China has taken proactive and concrete actions. And the President Xi actually also put forward dual carbon goals. Like President Brendan mentioned that we do have goals of carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. Actually, we should remember that when we talk about the year 2030 and 2050, our commitment is before 2030, before 2060. And so to achieve our goals, a leading group has been established, and we also have formulated 1+N policy framework. And this N element means all stakeholders should do something to make their own contribution.
37 different sectors announced their measures to counter the climate change, which will optimize our energy mix. We will further establish the global carbon market. Our transition toward the green energy is now very common in China. China is constantly promoting the climate governance of the world. President Xi is very engaged in this agenda. China has made an important contribution in the Paris Agreement, and we see a very good collaboration between the U.S. and China, so that we have achieved great success for the Paris Agreement. In the 2017 WEF conference, President Xi mentioned that the Paris Agreement is our future direction, and we cannot abandon it. Together, we're again meeting up each other in Davos. We're facing greater challenge than before, as Mr. Kerry mentioned. Here, we would like to urge all countries to work together, overcome the challenges in front of us. We have to turn our pledges into concrete actions. We have to follow the principles of Paris Agreement. We have to reinforce our actions. We have to implement the goals of Paris Agreement by working together in order to have a win-win situation in our global governance of climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will come back to this gentleman, but let me now turn to Elizabeth Batuti. I heard Elizabeth speak at COP26 as a young climate activist. Very impressive. Elizabeth, you also started and are the founder of the Generation Green Initiative. And based on the agreements in COP26, where do you feel we stand now, and how do you feel about the run-up to COP27?
The humanitarian crisis that I described to the world leaders at COP26 has only worsened since the last year. And right now, over 3 million of my fellow Kenyans and over 20 million people across the Horn of Africa and neighboring countries across Kenya are right now facing extreme hunger due to a record-breaking drought that has actually seen consecutive rainy seasons fail. And the war in Ukraine is now exacerbating these already terrifying high levels of food insecurity. And just over a week ago, I visited Wajir County, which is a county in northeastern part of Kenya. And what I witnessed there was a deeply shocking example of the suffering that the interconnected climate, nature, and food crisis is already bringing to bear across the African continent. I saw dead and dying livestock, the goats, cows, camels. All these are livestock that this community depend on for 80% of their livelihoods. But right now, they are not able to meet this because of the drought situation. The decimated wildlife, wild animals that have to walk for long distances to find water but end up losing the battle at the end of the day. And the hungry and desperate people who are also losing hope for their future. The reality of climate change is here, and it's getting worse. And it's getting worse because we're not taking the clear and concrete actions that science says that we must take in order to turn this around. And we know that we must break our deadly reliance on fossil fuels and also invest massively in a clean energy future and also ensure access to energy for all. We also know that we have to transform our global food systems, and we also have to raise our ambitions to limit warming to 1.5 degrees and assist others as well to meet this challenge by mobilizing finance and resources, including a separate finance facility for loss and damage. My message to the world leaders ahead of COP27 is still unchanged. Open your hearts and feel the immense suffering that our way of doing things is causing, and then act at the scale and speed needed to turn things around. This is not just a moment of compassion. This is a moment of action and reform. And what we will gain by solving the food, nature, and climate crisis together will be improved health, security, and also well-being everywhere. But we have to act with urgency. We have to fix this problem right now, because frontline communities are not waiting for the impacts of climate change to hit in the future. It's happening right now, and the best that we can do is to fix this right now so that we can actually save all of humanity.
Well, very good.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and also to share what is happening on the ground in Kenya. And as Elizabeth said, it's not any longer about why, it's about how. And Geraldine Machet, co-chair, co-CEO of Royal DSM, also the CFO. I know you're very passionate about what Elizabeth also talked about, agriculture and the food situation and the food crisis that we are faced with. And how can we turn the food and agriculture is today a major contributor to emissions. It also uses a lot of water for irrigation. How can we turn food production into something that can produce more food and decouple this from the negative effects and hurting nature? So over to you, Geraldine, and thank you for your leadership in this field.
Thank you, Roger, and hello, everyone. And thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing the reality of today on our doorstep. I think this week in Davos, we simply cannot avoid the fact that there is a food crisis as we speak, and that basically the food systems of this world are extremely fragile. Now, there's the crisis which is linked to the Ukraine situation, but this has been coming and is already here, as we've just heard. And it's probably worth going back just a little bit in time to put it into context. In 1950, we had 2.5 billion people on this planet, and at the time, 70% of humanity was living in poverty. And the biggest urgency was to feed everybody. So we put our brains to work, and our science and our innovation, and we focused for a few decades on producing more and more and more food. Now, we've actually been very successful. In the meantime, the number of humans on the planet tripled to over 7.5 billion. And we have actually managed to reduce over time the percentage and the absolute number of people who really are lacking food. However, if you look at the food systems of today, we are able to feed reasonably well about 3 billion people. There's another 3 billion people who are unable to afford a healthy diet. And there's 1 billion people who are simply undernourished. And the people on the brink of starvation has tripled in the last 2 years. So this picture is not good. And this is before we overlay an even worse impact from climate change, which is why this is why we're talking about food with climate, is that it's the same battle. In fact, this increase in food production has had a massive impact on planet Earth. Few facts: food production actually requires 70% of fresh water that we use in the world. It emits about a third, 34% of greenhouse gases, and it is by far the biggest cause of the loss of nature and biodiversity. Now, at the same time, climate change is the biggest victim, food systems is the biggest victim of climate change. We're seeing that in all geographies, and you said it very nicely in your introduction, there is not one country that isn't suffering from droughts, from floods, from fires, and all of our food systems are actually under threat. Now, if we look at that picture and we turn it into economic figures, the fact that our food systems are not sustainable is costing the world about 2 trillion a year. Now, if we are able to switch our food system from a net negative to a net positive, and the innovations exist, but we need to scale them, we'd be able to convert that minus 2 trillion into actually a positive 4.5 trillion of value creation and 400 million jobs with that. So an affordable, sustainable employment in food production is all very possible. Now, of course, this is nice to hear, but the question is always the how. And we could spend hours here debating that, but there's maybe a few thoughts to put in place here. The first, now, food production accounts for about a third of methane emissions, and we all know that methane is 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. We can buy time. We can buy time by at least reducing methane emissions wherever possible, be it from livestock, be it from land waste, and of course there are other sources of methane. But this is one first element, and that would actually extend to switching our food system to much more regenerative food system production. We have to change the way we produce food in the world. The other one is really about redirecting subsidies. There's about 600 billion of subsidies going to agricultural activities that unfortunately aren't subsidizing the sustainable practices, but are actually still subsidizing quantity over quality and quantity over sustainability. So this is actually within our hands to redirect that. And maybe last but not least, one has to have a debate around diets and climate resilient diets. And that is really looking at what are we eating as humans, because there's a big correlation with, of course, the health of the human beings. But we are seeing that some of the crops on which we rely the most to sustain healthy humans are actually not adapted to climate-impacted geographies. So this is the food crisis in the short term, linked to commodity prices and the impact of the Ukraine-Russia situation. It is a shock, but it is the first out of many that we can expect impacting the way that we are able to nourish ourselves.
Thank you, Geraldine. It's a stark reminder to all of us what is at stake. Mark Benioff, Salesforce, you're the founder, has been through a decade of transforming itself also to become even more sustainable. I think last year you went net zero, you used 100% renewable energy, and you're also a believer in technology. But as I mentioned at the start, with the current technology, we can also half an amount of emissions by 2030 if we wanted. You've also been a strong believer in nature-based solutions, being a supporter of the trillion trees. But how do you see the role of eco-entrepreneurs and innovations on top of the technologies and mitigation we can do with what we have today? Because it wouldn't hurt with some additional breakthroughs too. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you. This panel is so inspiring and energizing to me because I am ready for a new environmental capitalism. I'm demanding a new environmental capitalism for myself. It means exactly like you said, that my company, Salesforce, which is now 75,000 people based in San Francisco, must be net zero. But it also means that every company here at the forum must be net zero and fully renewable. We have no choice. We're at the time where we must create a net zero world. It's one of the reasons why the First Mover Coalition that we announced here at this conference is so important. That we announced that we were going to pre-buy $100 million of capability to extend our net zero status, and so many other companies as well. And I hope that every company will join us. It means that not only do we have to be net zero and fully renewable, it also means that we have to do everything we can to sequester 200 gigatons of carbon that's already out there, which is why we created the Trillion Tree Program. By planting 1 trillion trees, we can sequester 200 gigatons of carbon, and we must because we had 6 trillion trees, but as the world, we have deforested 3 trillion or half of our trees. That's 600 gigatons of carbon banking. We must put that back. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that we saw not only the governments of China and the governments of the US this year make major commitments to invest in trees and carbon sequestration, and creating, exactly as the minister said, from China, so articulately, carbon markets, so that we can enable and energize a new ecopreneur revolution. We see these technologies, exactly like you said, and so many young people here today who are building new companies that maybe they were like me, entrepreneurs, but now they are ecopreneurs focused on the environment. I was just in Sydney, Australia with one of these ecopreneurs. Guy Hudson has a very exciting company, Loam Bio, building a new kind of biological, that when you plant your soybean crop, you also plant it with this biological substance made out of mushrooms. What does it do? It doubles the soybean crop. It requires less fertilizer. It sequesters more carbon than ever before. And these types of technologies and these new companies, this is what we need. We need this kind of next generation of innovation. So I'm ready for a new environmental capitalism. And I hope that Salesforce can be an example that we can create great companies. This year, Salesforce will become the 3rd largest software company in the world. And as we enter the Fortune 100, we're doing it as net zero. I hope that it motivates every company here to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for coining this environmentalist capitalism. I I think this is something that can inspire. Also, thank you for your leadership in the First Movers Coalition that Secretary Kerry, President Biden, and the World Economic Forum launched at the COP26. This is really a coalition where 54 of the leading companies in the world, including Salesforce, the Apples of the world, the Amazons of the world, say that they commit then to say that their suppliers have to green and leave less of a CO2 footprint in their production, or they will not buy. That sends a very strong message, and it can accelerate also new technologies doing this. But let's come back to the Secretary and the Minister. It's so much of the future of the planet is in your hands. US and China is almost 50% of the global economy, and we know how powerful it is when you can agree. Before Paris, where you both played such an important role, we were on a track to a 4 degrees increase, 4 degrees. After Paris, on a track to 3. After COP26, when you did agree, we are now on the track, or potentially on the track, to 2 degrees. Not where we need to be, because that's 1.5, but no, we have to agree, and we have to implement the necessary measures to get to 1.5. So my question to you, honorable ministers and secretary, is how to get there. Will we get there, and will we now get the necessary momentum in the run-up to COP27, or will leaders now just focus on having all the necessary energy available, and they will forget about the green agenda? Maybe Secretary Kerry first?
Well, Borja, that obviously is a fundamental challenge right now. We are not on the track that we need to be right now. Emissions went up 6% last year. Coal use went up 9%. Wrong direction, folks. That's before Ukraine. Before Ukraine. Now Ukraine is being used as a lever to make the argument that, oh, wow, see, you got to have this energy security, which we do have to have. Nobody doubts that. But there's a headlong plunge to sort of say, well, that means we've got to drill a lot more and pump a lot more, and we've got to build out more infrastructure in order to be able to deliver the gas to Europe that we have to have, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we have to do some of those things. We have to make up for the gas that Russia's losing. That Russia is, you know, now that we're cutting Russia out and not selling it, so where are you going to get it from? Well, Europe has made a decision to completely accelerate their deployment of renewables. And France has determined that they're going to have to, you know, double down on nuclear and make different choices. So all of us need to recognize that, you know, we have the basic technologies now already deployed to get where we need to do in this next 8 years to meet the goal of a 45% reduction. But we do not have yet the technologies fully brought to scale and developed sufficiently to be able to do what we need to do to get net zero 2050. But first things first, we must get a 45% reduction in these next 8 years, because the same science and the same scientists tell us if you don't reduce enough between 2020 and 2030, barring a miracle discovery of something that we don't even know, you know, that we don't have yet, you can't have a steep enough, you can't meet the decline that you have to achieve over those next years by 2050. You can't do it. So this decade, this next 8 years decides whether or not we blow through 1.5 degrees or whether we in fact can achieve our goal. And we can't do it, folks, if the new theology is going to become, we got to build out a massive gas infrastructure. without regard to abatement and mitigation of that gas. The reason we are in the predicament we're in today is fossil fuel burning in a way that has polluted the atmosphere. And so much so that this blanket is heating up the planet at an unacceptable rate. And we see it happening. You heard Elizabeth. Millions of people are being affected by this right now. We have climate refugees on this planet right now. We have people who are, we have a threat to the entire food production structure of Africa. And if all of a sudden that were to implode, you're going to have hundreds of millions of people looking for a place to live. If you think migration has been a challenge to the world over the course of the last 25, 30 years, wait till you see what happens if we don't do what we know we have to do over the course of these next years. Now, I've always talked very directly with my friend Xie Zhenhua. We always deal with these things very honestly, and he knows that I am urging China, just as I'm urging the United States. We must reduce emissions faster. We must deploy current level of technology on solar, on wind. And we have other technologies we're aware of with respect to hydro or geothermal or other things that we could do. So we can meet the goal of the 45% if we summon the political will to do it. And the entrepreneurial activities that are ongoing are genuinely exciting. I was in California recently looking at what was happening with Google X, what was happening with our laboratory and fusion, where, by the way, they have made genuine new breakthroughs and there are new possibilities. And we're also looking at startups, young companies that are doing new things in battery storage, in green hydrogen, in direct air carbon capture, where they're now utilizing the carbon that they capture, making it into product. This is the future. And if we will commit to that wholeheartedly and not make the mistakes of the past by building out a 30 or 40-year infrastructure of fossil fuel that is not mitigated or abated to the levels near what we need, that would be a catastrophic mistake and a guarantee we blow through the 1.5 degrees, and God knows what happens even with 2 degrees and beyond. This battle is being fought now for the next 8 years to determine whether or not we can achieve net zero by 2050. And we need China to join with us. And I hope in these next months that Xie Zhenhua and I, and it's not the two of us who are as important as Borga has made us, it's President Biden and President Xi. And it's their determination about what we will do that can make the decision as to whether or not China can accelerate its ability, which it agreed to work with us to do. We've already crossed that bridge. China said it's prepared to work with us to try to accelerate the transition from coal. And China also has agreed they're going to go after methane. Methane, my friends, is so critical. Now, because of permafrost thawing in Siberia, in the tundra, in Alaska, you could light a match over bubbles coming up out of the water and the water will burn. Light on fire. That's methane. And the problem is methane is 20 to 80 times more damaging than CO2. And it's the easiest thing to begin to fix. It's low tech. It's plumbing. You fix pipes that leak. You fix connectors that leak. You plug the holes of wells that you used to use, but you don't leave them open. You stop flaring. You stop venting. There's as much gas being flared and vented now as Europe gets from Russia in a year. So we can do this. And I hope Xie Zhenhua and I will be able to take what we've done in the last 2 COPs to the level that we need to get to win the battle.
Thank you, Secretary Kerry. So, Minister Xie, does Secretary Kerry make sense to you?
There's only one answer to that.
or maybe be a little bit more precise in my question. Do you agree with him that we must reduce emissions faster?
这个我跟克里先生从去年我们俩当特首之后。
Last year, and Kerry and I actually were both special envoy, and we actually have convened for 40 meetings. So you can see that we met every 8 or 9 days. And during those meetings, we talked about how to work together and move forward. So just now I mentioned how to achieve the goals made in the Paris Agreement. And I think we should work together and take the low carbon and the circular economy approach. Just now, Mr. Kerry mentioned the energy mix has to be adjusted and transformed. In recent years, in China, the proportion of coal in the energy system has been dropped from 74 to 56. And so far, we actually have developed the renewable energy, and the installed capacity has already reached 1 billion kilowatts per hour. And for 7 years, for 7 consecutive years, our investment in sustainability actually has been over 100 billion yuan. So when we talk about the adjustment of energy mix, and our focus is trying to build the system which is based on renewable energy, and we are trying to move away from fossil fuels. And also we have announced that we will stop building coal-powered plants abroad. So in terms of the industry sector, such as cement and steel, etc., we have made appropriate guidance and measures to set the standards so that each industry can achieve its low carbon development. In terms of transportation, China has developed our electric vehicle, and actually we ranked the top 1 in the world in terms of ownership of electric vehicles. And because electric vehicles and new energy can help us to be energy efficient, so far our ability in terms of energy efficiency has been more than half of the total in the world. What China is doing is pursuing circular economy. So the out of the value reached 3 trillion yuan, and also employed more than 6 billion people. And so you can see that, and active and concrete action has been taken in different industries. So we cannot just we can just talk the talk. We also need to take the action. Another element, which is forest, which is also very important, and we actually have enjoyed the increase of our forest stock volume. And in terms of green coverage, China actually accounts for 25% of the world total. So, currently we actually have a kind of initiative to plant the trees, and we would like to accept this initiative. And in the following decade, And China plan to plant 700 million trees in order to make our contribution. So it doesn't matter how you say it. What matters is how you do it. And Kerry is my good friend. Before COP26, we made 2 joint statements. So what we will do now is to change those commitments and our joint statement into action and the cooperation between USA and America. So in the end, to conclude, the action is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Xie. Those commitments made at Paris and COP26 has now become a Davos declaration. We make commitments into action. And this is what it's all about when you also then work with the private sector and mobilize civil society, private sector and governments towards 1.5. Every consequential session has to come to an end. So I don't dare going back to the 2 gentlemen anymore, because we will have to end on Swiss time, that is 2:30. So I will give the 3 panelists 2 minutes each. I will go to Geraldine first, then to Mark, and I think the future needs to end such a panel, because it is about Elizabeth's future and all the young people on our planet. So over to you, Geraldine, first, then to Mark, and then to Elizabeth. But 1.5 minutes each, and then we can end on time.
Thank you very much. And while there's absolutely no doubt, of course, that the climate crisis and the climate battle has to do with energy, it also has a lot to do with nature. And photosynthesis is a very strong power to sequester carbon. So maybe my last thought for us today is to really home in on the innovations that can leverage the power of nature to help us win this battle as well. And there's a lot of innovations out there that we can scale. I mean, regenerative agriculture, it doesn't need to be invented, it needs to be scaled. And this is something which is entirely in our hands with no major capital investments, simply a determination to move that in all geographies much, much faster. And here we're talking about cover crops, no-tilling, there's all kinds of approaches, reducing methane from livestock being one of them. And as DSM, a science-based company, this is where our passion goes, and Borge, you said very correctly, we are very passionate about this, which is how can we leverage the power of nature in order to address climate change and food security for the world going forward, knowing that as we sit today, we are seeing a highly deteriorating picture. So even more action needed on that front.
Thank you to Geraldine Machet, the co-CEO of DSM. No, to another co-CEO. I think you became co-CEO since last time we met, Mark. Yes. Co-CEO of your company, Salesforce.
Well, thanks. This has been a great panel. I really appreciate the World Economic Forum bringing this critical subject to this stage and to business. And also, I really appreciate John Kerry as well as Minister Xie coming from China. It's so important. This is a moment of action. Just like you said, we must create a net zero world. This is the time where we have to accelerate and reduce our use of fossil fuels and reduce our deforestation. And just like the minister said, we must get to reforestation. And with China has 25% of the world's trees, and we need to plant 1 trillion trees, so I'm going to assign China for 250 billion trees, please. Thank you very much. And we must energize and inspire an ecopreneur revolution, and we're talking about methane. Oh, we have a great company here at the WEF that called Planet Labs. They're launching small satellites, and there's one going up called Carbon Mapper, and it can read the methane that's on the planet. Today, we don't have a way to see transparently where all the methane is and all the methane leaks, but we shortly will. And these kinds of ecopreneurs who are creating all these kind of next generation technologies, they need all of our attention and our investment and our focus, and I want to thank you especially to the WEF for bringing so many of them here and inspiring us. And I hope we will continue to double and triple their presence, and we do everything we can to make them as successful as possible. Well done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for your warm and not least inspirational words. Before going to you, Elizabeth, there are many leaders in the climate world here in the audience, but I also would like to acknowledge Vice President Al Gore's presence here on the first row. Thank you for your leadership, Al. Elizabeth, you can sum up now.
Thank you. What I didn't hear today is what is holding us back and how we can unlock everything. But I will tell you, what is holding us back and from dealing with this interconnected nature, climate and food crisis is actually not lack of scientific knowledge or even lack of technology. These are human problems, and the solutions to them lie in the human mind, heart, and human head. So we can absolutely find our way out of this planetary emergency, but for us to do so, we will need to change our way of thinking, and we will need to begin telling new stories of what is important and actually what is possible. And to me, that is the key to actually unlocking everything. Because right now, the life-sustaining relationship between nature and humanity is not being recognized, valued, or even being protected. We are perpetuating an ecocidal economic system that is destroying nature and all of humanity. And this is a system that's destroying nature faster than nature can even regenerate herself. So we have to stop destroying our own life support system as humans. But it doesn't have to be this way, because we know that a future that has a stable climate, clean air to breathe, clean drinking water, food to eat, it's very possible. But again, we need international cooperation and solidarity for us to achieve this. And what is needed now is actually courageous and urgent action from each and every person, each and every sector, because we have to change course when we still can. And we all know that time is running out. We have been saying that time and again. But again, we have to make sure that we are turning our words into action, and we have to be born of compassion and respect for ourselves and all of life on earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Elizabeth Vatuti. I'm positive that we'll hear more from you in the future, and thank you for ending this panel in such a touching way. Thank you to a great panel. Thank you for your commitment and leadership. Thank you.